Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, June 15th, 2018, and the president perilously close to death, apparently. I had no idea. He walked out of the White House today and nearly dropped dead. I don't want to tease you or anything, but he walked down the halfway, as Bill writes in Portland, Maine, in his morning tweet. I might as well start with this one. Daily Co's Radio is live now, and Kagro X, that's me, has a progress report on Donald Trump's attempt to walk halfway down the White House driveway. His first 10 steps were reportedly wheezy but successful, and that's really what's going on this morning and what has everyone's attention on Twitter. And I guess at some point, I feel ashamed that once again this morning I contribute to the nonsense of paying attention to the half-dead gas bag that we have as president. But I guess that he knows how to put on a press spectacle. He walked out of the White House today for some reason, I guess, to meet the Fox News folks on the White House lawn and give them a quote-unquote interview, which has been very revealing of his authoritarian tendencies, certainly, but not much else. But yeah, he's giving another one of his interviews in which he's sniffing and gasping for breath audibly between every phrase. I mean, he's blurting a lot of things out. They're nonsense, of course, and we could parse through them. I guess most egregious of the bunch, and there's a lot of reporters out there taking notes and tweeting out what he's said. There's some video from Fox available for it. Ryan Strzok has this snippet here that's got everyone up in arms, and rightfully so. Trump on Kim Jong-un. He says, he speaks and people sit up at attention. I want my people to do the same. And he doesn't mean his cabinet not falling asleep at their meetings. He apparently means he wants everyone in America to sit in rapt attention when he speaks. And of course, plenty of people, there's no shortage of people pointing out on Twitter, but not to the president's face necessarily, but pointing out he is a dictator who will have you murdered if you don't sit at attention when he speaks. And you really shouldn't be asking for that for yourself or comparing or speaking of it favorably. But, to no avail. I mean, the guy's a total idiot, and he knows he's going to get press for doing things this way, so it's not going to change too much. But, it really was remarkable to me how much, how winded he was from this short walk down the driveway. M.A. Nelson, I guess. Thank you for joining us and enjoying the show. I don't think we've heard from you in the past. Maybe, and I may have missed it, but she enjoyed a half-dead gas bag. And she's laughing quite a bit. Don't hurt yourself. I don't want anybody else winded. We need to be healthy for this. I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry. I had to spit it out. The guy is unbelievable, and the fact that we don't say so, I think, is embarrassing. I don't know. It's not news or anything. Let me put a few things aside here for just a second. It's Friday, of course. We are without Greg Dworkin, as usual, on a Friday. We can only get so much of his time these days in the morning. But plenty to go over today. I'm enjoying a few political cartoons flying across the screen, and the gist of them, of course. I guess what am I looking at? Is this I had heard a story of a political cartoonist who had been fired. Because of, this must be it. This is how the thread started out here. I'm looking at the tweet of Rob Rogers saying, sad to report this update today after 25 years as the editorial cartoonist for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I was fired. And the story appears to be that after a series of anti-Trump cartoons, and how else could you approach being a political cartoonist at this point? I guess they'd had enough at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. No more saying what everybody else is thinking but afraid to say. That's reserved for the guy who used that path to the presidency. Now everyone else has to suffer because you're supposed to be sitting up in rapt attention, apparently, at every utterance. And there's no room for political cartoons. I did just tweet this one around with a comment, but I want to save this for the roundup. But no, TweetDeck will not scroll backwards. You're not allowed to do that, and you should get lost. Of course, if you ever let anything scroll past on TweetDeck, you're effing doomed. You'll never see it again. It disappears. It's gone forever. Hopefully, the fact that I tweeted it out means I can recover it later on. We'll give it a shot. All right. Let's see. I am going to... that's an interesting story, too. We'll put that one aside. Boy, I'm distractible today. Let's see. I guess there's probably no point in following up my earlier comments about Trump giving this crazy-ass interview out there. I shouldn't give him any more attention. And you won't need it from me. You can get it elsewhere. He's saying lots of stupid things, including reiterating the dumb idea he has in his head that Justin Trudeau thought for even a minute that Donald Trump would be disconnected from a television. His idea of why Justin Trudeau said something less than glowing about Donald Trump after the G7 summit, besides the fact that Donald Trump almost destroyed the G7, with his ravings while he was there. And despite that, and despite the fact that what Justin Trudeau had to say on TV wasn't particularly jarring or it certainly wasn't wrong, but it was very mild. If it was criticism at all, it was extraordinarily mild criticism. And Donald Trump says he took umbrage at it. I don't even necessarily believe that. I don't know if I believe that he saw it on television. I believe he was probably told by someone else that they had seen on television that Trudeau had been critical of Trump. Because, well, I don't know. One, if Trump had actually seen it, if he were a reasonable person, and he's not. So I don't know how much assumption I can make on that front. But if he had seen it, I doubt very much that he would have thought that was critical. And that's not even his MO. Why wouldn't he just say he was being extraordinarily complimentary of me and leave it at that? Someone must have told him, because he's lazy. He's lazy. He gets all his news from the television, but sometimes he's too lazy to watch. He's too lazy to watch news that he would think might be boring. I don't want to waste my time on the boring stuff. I want to watch exciting news like Gorilla Channel and any porn we might have if I'm allowed. Is he allowed to watch it on the airplane and just not in the White House, or what? Not sure. Somebody probably told him he was critical of him, so that's his story. Justin Trudeau probably thought we didn't have televisions on Air Force One. I think everybody knows you have televisions on Air Force One. You can launch missiles and, electronic countermeasures from ATA. You can do anything you want. The whole point of Air Force One, the reason we don't let you fly on your own stupid airplane is because we have to have you flying on a plane that's capable of doing just about anything from the air that the president needs to need to do from the White House. I think everybody knows that Air Force One has pretty much everything there is to need up there. And two, the idea that there's a person alive today that thinks you would unplug from your intravenous telly consumption, I really don't believe. Even though I don't think for a minute that it was tuned to the channel that Justin Trudeau was using to discuss the G7 summit. But anyway, I just thought I'd remind everybody about that one. All right, let's see. Shall we just catch up? Should we do sort of lightning rounds and then maybe dive into a few things in depth just to finish out the weekend? Let's see. Also of interest of the last couple of days, BuzzFeed News is the source I'm looking at for this one. Trump told G7 leaders that Crimea is Russian. Now, that's a point of some contention. Of course, they are occupying Crimea and they're annexing Crimea, but it is or was, at least this time. I mean, who knows where that thing belongs? Crimea that's one of the places that have changed hands a billion times throughout history. But the status quo ante, as it were, was that Crimea was part of the sovereign territory of Ukraine, in as much as Ukraine, especially in Russia, could be described as having sovereign territory. But, there's a bit of history there. And anyway, Russia annexed Crimea and took it from Ukraine. And there's some question about perhaps where that thing lands properly. But Trump's reasoning here is very much like Putin's reasoning. Surprise! He thinks, it's not from a deep understanding of the history of the region. This is what Putin told him. And he says that Crimea is Russian because everyone speaks Russian in Crimea. And it's probably true that almost everyone does speak Russian here, and that's also largely because almost everyone in Ukraine speaks Russian, though there's, a Ukrainian language as well. And guess what? It's remarkably similar to the language of their neighbor and former occupier, and of course everyone speaks Russian in a lot of former Soviet republics because they were occupied for years by the Soviets and forced to speak Russian. That's just largely true. And of course, very few people had any difficulty pointing out the logical conclusion that we were English since we speak English. But anyway, it's a particularly insulting thing to say to anyone about the situation in Crimea and in Ukraine, and in particular to our own allies, to say to them, I view this geopolitical hotspot through Russian lenses. The Russians tell me what to think and say about things that would otherwise be bad PR at best, I guess, among the Western nations about Russia. It was previously unanimously held among the G7 that Crimea had been improperly, if not necessarily illegally, and it really was illegal, but I don't know if everybody would sign a statement saying illegal, but that the annexation was improper and a violation of international law. And he came to the G7, who I'm sure view themselves as the keepers of international law, rightly or wrongly, to tell them, no, I actually, I take my cues from the Russians. Between that and showing up and telling them that they should be readmitting the Russians to the G7 and recreating the G8 because this occupation for which they were being faulted wasn't really an occupation at all, but a repatriation of Russian citizens to Russia. I mean, you might as well just go there and say, I don't understand why you're all not surrendering. I think that I think we should admit Russia to NATO and give them the command. See if that one goes over. Well, you could try that one, but I don't know. Maybe he thought even that was too audacious. There's a whole, write up behind it, but like I said, we'll kind of hit highlights and headlines, therefore getting very misleading views of the news. And that way we'll be perfectly in tune with the rest of the country. Here's something that we might want to look a little further into. There's, I've got two pieces here. Should we do headlines or look in a little deeper? Maybe a little deeper. Here, The Guardian is reporting this roundup of the Singapore meeting, for lack of a better term for this thing. I still don't know exactly what to call it. Antsy and bored Trump nearly left Kim summit, I hate calling it a summit, in peril, report says. That's interesting because that's kind of contrary to what we've been hearing. I expect to hear things contrary to what we heard from the president, but most people are, of course, there's a a movement afoot, I guess, among even the mainstream press to say, well, okay, the president is an idiot and he doesn't know what he's talking about, and there was no real agreement of any substance reached, and he doesn't understand what was in the agreement, and the agreement was poorly written and vaguely drafted, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing really happened here. And by the way, I want to endorse, I think, the view I got of this from Greg's roundup yesterday, and just reiterate, I think it makes a great deal of sense. It helps me feel like I understand a little bit more what went on in looking at this from what was purported to be the South Korean perspective, or at least one of the South Korean perspectives in all of this. That how could it be, for instance, that the South Koreans could come out satisfied from a meeting like this, and they may not be in the end satisfied. Why did they agree to help engineer such a thing if they knew that Donald Trump was going to be in charge of it for the United States and would have no chance at all of coming out of this with an agreement to denuclearize North Korea? And if I understood what Greg was sharing with us yesterday, and that's always a big question mark, but he's pretty good at explaining it, it was that the South Koreans weren't looking necessarily for a denuclearization of North Korea. That would be fantastic, but perhaps beyond hope. I mean, I think they know by now that Kim is, not really the kind of person to deliver on something like that. But it sounded like at least one school of thought was, look, we don't care if anything comes of the summit in terms of an agreement on nuclear weapons. We're resigned at this point to the fact that North Korea is going to possess nuclear weapons and threaten us with them constantly. We are chiefly concerned with the fact that Donald Trump appears to be crazy and worse, stupid. And Kim Jong-un appears to be, a Kim, and, just largely dedicated to fanning the flames of his antagonism for South Korea and the rest of the world. But in combination, they're dangerous, and we've gotten to the point where I don't think it's a good idea to antagonize Kims in general, and we do it from time to time, of course, because it's necessary to point out that the family is a bunch of brutal dictators, and it's horrible, and conditions in North Korea are terrible, and they're constantly threatening regional and or worldwide war over their strange delusions about the inevitable role in history that their brand of totalitarian communism plays. And that's tiresome, but you just deal with it as best you can. But that having Donald Trump installed as president of the United States actually took it to the point where, okay, you might be able to provoke Kim into just, saying, this is it. I was born for launching this final conflagration. My father thought it was his destiny. My grandfather thought it was his destiny, but clearly they were waiting for me. This is it. This is the sign from wherever a totalitarian communist Korean dictator would be looking for signs. And it's time to launch, and, we'll let, whatever higher powers, if any, we believe in, take it from here. Take the wheel, whomever, and we're going to just nuke the world. And Donald Trump was perhaps capable of actually triggering that, and the South Koreans were chiefly interested in, shut up. I want a stop to these little Rocket Man tweets. I want a stop to the constant stream of public insults from the American president, because Kim Jong-un would like nothing better than to be able to point to the provocation he needs to provoke the final conflagration that ends it all. Maybe. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the belief in South Korea, that he was eventually looking for such an excuse, and Donald Trump was finally it. And that's scary, and it left them on edge. And all they were really interested in is, I gotta have Trump stop doing this. Kim may never stop doing what he does, but the world is used to ignoring what he does. The world is not used to ignoring what the American president does, and that's getting under Kim's skin. We cannot get him to stop by saying, please stop, you're endangering all of us. That's not going to work with Donald Trump. He doesn't care. He doesn't believe that he's making a situation worse no matter what he's doing with it, and there's no convincing him of it. He almost assuredly thought that rage tweeting at Kim Jong-un was making the situation better. I'll intimidate him, and then he won't use his missiles because he'll be so scared of my big button. And I'm sure that was his strategy. And South Korea may have been saying the only way we can convince him to stop rage tweeting at Kim Jong-un is to convince him, one, that Kim Jong-un should be considered a friend. He doesn't rage tweet about his actual friends, people he really thinks I shouldn't say actual friends, people he really thinks are friends to him. He does anger tweet at people who declare themselves his friend, but he doesn't believe it for whatever reason. Like there was an interesting exchange recently as Lindsey, well, it wasn't an exchange from the president right now, but someone pointing out previous tweets that he had made about Lindsey Graham, who had just tweeted out his birthday wishes. Apparently it was Donald Trump's birthday yesterday. Tweeted out his birthday wishes to Trump, including a picture of the two of them together, I think in the Oval Office, and it's god awful, but it made for a good juxtaposition. Where is this one? Trump, or the tweet was, Lindsey Graham, happy birthday, Mr. President. You're keeping your promise to make America safer and more prosperous. And unfortunately for me, you're doing all this without losing step in your golf game. And he tags real Donald Trump and hashtag Trump birthday. And a picture of the two of them in the Oval Office, Trump sitting in his chair. When he sits in his chair and has you stand next to him and takes the photo, I think the criminology on that is, I don't actually like this person, but, I'm doing this photo for some reason. Anyway, Jess Dweck then tweets out this pull from, I don't know when, a couple, let's see, there's probably a date on there somewhere. Yeah, there isn't. So I should forget about it. Anyway, this old piece, I guess a Politico tweet, in which they quote Donald Trump as saying, at some point in the now distant past, Lindsey Graham, a, quote, disgrace, quote, nut job, quote, one of the dumbest human beings. And thanks for the birthday wishes. Right along with that, it's, you get the idea what I'm saying. So how do they get him to stop anger tweeting at Kim? And the answer is you got to have a chocolate cake summit, just like he did with Xi Jinping, in Mar-a-Lago. We had this delicious chocolate cake. Now, of course, he's in something of a Twitter war with China as an entity, but he still will tell you to this day, oh, President Xi and I are great friends. We really understand each other. We really trust each other. And that's all the same things he's saying about Kim Jong-un now. So I think maybe here the strategy was the only way we can get him to stop anger tweeting with Kim is to let him convince himself that he has changed the nature of the relationship. Now they've had their chocolate cake summit or some equivalent, and they're friends. And now I won't say bad things about my friends, and it doesn't matter whether there's any sincere movement toward denuclearization, and it doesn't matter whether the North Koreans cooperate with anything or allow for any verification or even move forward at all, just so long as Donald Trump stops anger tweeting and maybe the North Koreans stop their accelerated and increased saber rattling in the absence of his anger tweets. And in that sense, the so-called summit may have been a success. Although I doubt very much, it's certainly not the case in the reporting, I doubt very much that they expected to wake up to find out that the South Koreans' regular military protection, underwritten chiefly by the United States, is being withdrawn. I don't think all the reports are that it came as a complete surprise to the South Koreans that the United States was going to suspend any military exercises in or around the Korean Peninsula, or that the president was considering and really, in fact, hoping to be able to remove all American troops from South Korea on the premise that canceling the military exercises would save us money, and that removing the troops would also at least stop spending money that is unrequited and unreciprocated from the South Koreans. Everything, appears to be about dollars and cents to Trump. That's what made him famous, even though he didn't have any and doesn't know how to make any. This is his excuse. Well, we shouldn't be providing defense of South Korea because South Korea doesn't pay us for that. It's a protection racket out there, and America should only be protecting those people who will pay us to do so. Apparently, that's the thinking when it comes to, figuring anything out. So I think they were perhaps blindsided by that one, but I would think still largely satisfied with the outcome insofar as it gets Trump to stop screaming that he is a blood enemy of Kim Jong-un. So if that's the result, they're probably happy with that. However, there is more reporting emerging from the area, and I guess from out of the Singapore meeting, which I was talking up at the beginning. We'll save it for after the break to dive in a little bit further. The Guardian reporting this one. Antsy and bored, Trump nearly left the Kim summit in peril, report says. He almost blew this stupid propaganda thing up for himself just because he couldn't pay attention long enough. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Coming out of the break here, just a little bit of a news update. Let's see, is this happening right now? Michael Del Moro. Who's Michael Del Moro? Michael Del Moro is the booking producer at MSNBC's Morning Joe. Super terrific production. Anyway, he says that he is heard. Anyway, it says President Trump says, he must have been blurting it out on the White House lawn. President Trump says Michael Cohen is no longer his lawyer, which is sort of breaking news in the sense that, he's now said this thing and we all have to gasp at it, but Michael Cohen was never his lawyer in the first place. And so, okay, what are we down to? 2 clients now? Does he still have Elliot Broidy as a client? And Sean Hannity disputes the fact that he's his lawyer too. So, deservedly the case. Anyway, man, things are getting crazy out there. Where's the story I had? Yes, the Antsy and Board story from The Guardian. The president almost upended the summit by wanting to move the event forward a day after tense staff meeting with North Korean officials. I was wondering about that when he arrived in Singapore, and I was like, he said he was going to only take a minute to figure out whether or not Kim was serious. When's the minute? And I was surprised to find out that the president was going to be on the ground in Singapore for almost an entire day before these two nuts were going to, meet at some point. And of course, there was such a pageant that I guess it probably took a day to stage the thing and rehearse all the stuff. Like, we're going to have these, you saw it, red carpets from one end of the, one wing of the hotel, and then red carpet from the other wing of the hotel, and you guys stay in each wing, and then you walk out and you meet in the middle of this display of United States and North Korean flags side by side, which was remarkable in itself. Shake hands, walk towards the thing, and when you meet, you're going to go into this room behind closed doors, but I want you to walk to the doors, and we'll have cameras inside. The doors will swing open, and you'll walk in together and then sit at a table. And there was all sorts of staged settings for the pageant that they were putting on. By the way, did you see this thing? I saw somebody had the genius idea of taking that footage that they put out of the two of them walking through the doors simultaneously, these big, heavy wooden doors, ornate doors, the camera inside, they swing open toward the camera, revealing Trump and Kim side by side entering the summit room, whatever the hell you would call this thing. And somebody was genius enough to put that to the old People's Court music. So as they entered the courtroom, because of course it was very visually very similar. And you know how antsy and bored Trump gets when it's 5 minutes to Wapner. Anyway, I was surprised that he had agreed to a schedule that would put him on the ground with Kim for almost a full day, and they both spend that day in isolation from one another in different wings of the hotel. I didn't think it was going to be a huge problem because, frankly, asking Donald Trump to hang around the luxury hotel with nothing to do for a day probably wasn't going to get in his way very much. But given that he thought this whole thing was going to be a snap and be done in the first minute, I assume in the end he got antsy and he wanted that minute already. Well, here's the reporting by Martin Pengelly, or Pengelly perhaps, Pengelly. Is it GIF or GIF, Martin? You can tell us later. And antsy and bored Donald Trump, and that's in quotes, antsy and bored, reportedly attempted to bring his summit with Kim Jong-un of North Korea forward by a day, asking aides after his arrival in Singapore on Sunday, "We're here now, why can't we just do it?" Although that could have been a request for flying Stormy Daniels in for a visit, I'm not sure. The one-day summit, which really tells you all you need to know, aimed at reducing the threat from nuclear-armed North Korea, went ahead as planned on Tuesday. But on Friday, citing two people familiar with preparations for the event, the Washington Post said the president's impatience and a tense staff meeting with North Korean officials left some aides fearful that the entire summit might be in peril. Interesting. I missed the Washington Post reporting on this one, but let's see what they have to say. I want to know what they're telling people in the UK. Citing people familiar with the talks, the Post report said, and I guess I should open it up to see what their headline is like. The Post report said, ultimately, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders persuaded Trump to stick with the original plan, arguing that the president and his team could use the time to prepare. That was a terrible argument. Do you think they bought that for even a second? I don't want to prepare. I'm already prepared. Why can't we? That's it. That's the headline of the Washington Post. How did I miss this thing? It's running over the footage of him saluting the North Korean general, of course. Why can't we just do it? Trump nearly upended summit with abrupt changes is the header on this piece by Ashley Parker, Josh Dawsey, Carol Leonig, and Karen DeYoung. But I might as well continue with the Guardian piece. It's very sophisticated. I should read it to you in an English accent. You know that's supposed to make people feel smarter, but I have not been able to envision them as smarter. And it was never, of course, a particularly reasonable thing to think about things. But this is sort of an advertising convention. You want something to be classy and smart, give it an English accent in the ad, and that'll work. And then there was the Brexit vote, and I was like, all right, we can stop that now. They're no smarter than we are. All right, well, I don't know how successful they really were in persuading Trump to stick with the original plan because time could be used to prepare. My guess is he blew that off and said, screw it, I don't need to. He'd already said publicly he doesn't need to prepare anymore. So they might have said, you can watch Telly as long as you want for today. You can watch any program you want. And they even have porn probably in this hotel, and that'll make you happy. My kids are around. They shouldn't hear such things. But okay, it's true. I didn't say it. He did. Or at least Mika Brzezinski did. Anyway, they also, the Post said, warned him that he might sacrifice wall-to-wall television coverage of his summit if he abruptly moved the long-planned date to Monday in Singapore, which would be Sunday night in the United States. That is a genius argument. The television timing in the U.S. will be screwed up. We won't be on, all day long. It won't be during the work day in America. They need to see that you're having a work day in Singapore, and that's actually difficult to time. If we just do this now, it'll be like in the television dead zone of Sunday night. All right, now you're talking. Trump's preparation for the event was long a point of contention. See, I knew that wouldn't work for him. In May, after North Korea criticized his vice president, Mike Pence, Trump said the summit was canceled. Remember that? It wasn't that long ago. He later said his approach to the meeting was not about preparation, but about attitude. We remember this whole episode, of course. He then told a press conference in Canada before traveling to Singapore he would know within the first minute if the summit would be a success, thanks to just my touch, my feel. After meeting Kim, he told reporters that he and the dictator got to know each other well in a very confined period of time. I know when somebody wants to deal, and I know when somebody doesn't. Sure, in Korean. I'm positive you know everything. The substance of the summit has been widely criticized, in most part for the failure to secure a written commitment to North Korean denuclearization, which the Trump administration had repeatedly demanded. Trump also signaled a major concession to Pyongyang when he said he would cancel U.S.-South Korean military exercises to the surprise of South Korea and the U.S. Defense Department, which, by the way, has since come out and said, yep, we're suspending them indefinitely. We really didn't have that much choice other than to say we're going to do what the commander-in-chief says. Footage of the president saluting a North Korean general has also been widely criticized, as has a video production by the National Security Council, allegedly. We still don't know exactly how that got made, to appeal to Kim and Trump's apparent dismissal of human rights concerns. And Trump's apparent dismissal of human rights concerns pertaining to the North Korean regime. The U.S. president repeatedly praised the North Korean leader for being tough. And, of course, that had something to do with his not bringing up human rights. One, he doesn't care about human rights, our president. And two, he thinks violations of human rights are tough and actually kind of cool. And so, anyway, he didn't want to do anything that he thought would upset the other wacko at the meeting. So he didn't. And you can't tell me to do that. And it's all politically correct nonsense anyway. And screw you people. So, we weren't likely to get any satisfaction on that front. Anyway, thought that was interesting. Speaking of chocolate cake summits and of taking your orders from Putin, that would lead us to this piece from The New Yorker. Let's open this one up. Susan Glasser on this one. Susan B. Glasser. I don't know whether that's important to her to have that B in there or not, but I'll credit her with it. It's there. We'll believe it. There's no stopping him. That's the quote in the headline. Trump insists on a Putin summit. After Singapore, the president is pressing ahead with the meeting that he's always wanted. And we did read a little bit about, did we read the story about the background of why he wanted to have a summit? I think so. And I think we were sort of disappointed in it. All it really told us, it didn't tell us anything new. It was all, well, he thinks Putin's cool and tough and he wants to meet him because he's extraordinarily rich and runs the country as a personal empire, and he wishes he could do the same thing and or would like to get a bunch of money from him. But I can't remember whether we actually I'll take a peek back at the thing and see whether it makes an appropriate follow-up. The basics of this, though, really, I think, are hinted at in this headline. There's no stopping him. Trump insists on a Putin summit. I would guess that there are probably those who were advising him. At the moment, it does not strike us as a particularly smart thing to do politically, either domestically or internationally, for you to have a summit with Putin. Everyone believes that time spent alone with Putin will be time spent having him giving you marching orders Everyone suspects you of taking his marching orders, rightly or wrongly, sir. But that's the perception. And if you go rushing off to meet him, everyone will think it's because you forgot your instructions or are looking for more or just want to know what you can do by way of licking his boots. And the fact that you were making a beeline for a meeting with him will be viewed very negatively. But I think probably they were all afraid to tell him that. Maybe John Kelly made some mention of it. But anyway, as is implied by the headline, he must have made it clear, I don't care what any of you say. I want to meet the great Russian bear and, wrestle with him, oiled up and shirtless. I don't know what he wants to do. All right. Fresh off his showy Singapore summit with the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, President Trump is pushing his team to arrange another dramatic one-on-one meeting. And that's, I guess, what's really behind it, too, is when you think of summits, and remember that Donald Trump's brain is largely stuck in the 80s, his glory days, his hair was normal, he was relatively thin, he was a smashing success with the real estate and the ladies, if you believe that. Cocaine parties for selling condos, Studio 54, the works. And his brain is therefore stuck there. And in those days, there weren't summits with 2-bit dictators from backwaters. Summits were for U.S. and Soviet leaders. The superpowers had summits and were represented at summits, and he wants one of those. And the only place he can really have it, as much as he tried to stick the label of summit on the North Korea thing, is to meet with the Russian leader. Even if he didn't have that weird man crush on him, that would still be something he would want. Presidents have summits. This is how they establish themselves as the leader of the free world. I want to have that thing. What are you going to talk about? What's the subject? What usually there's a reason for a summit. I don't know. I don't have one, but it'll probably be arms control because, once again, that's what people had summits about in the 80s and in my glory days. I don't know if he remembers exactly what went on at those things, but remember, it's been a long-standing dream of his to negotiate nuclear arms reduction on behalf of the United States, not because he's against nuclear weapons, not because he wants to reduce the threat of war, but because that, at the time that he still had his brain and was at his peak, was what Americans did that was super important and regarded as by everyone in the world as super important. Reducing nuclear weapons. I don't care. I still want to have them. I still want to use them. Yes, but whatever. I get the headlines as being awesome if I if I negotiate an arms control treaty with the Soviets. All right, what's he up to? Let's see if it ever gets revealed why he wants to meet. There's no stopping him. Or did I leave off up here? Yeah, he wants the one-on-one meeting, this time with Russian President Vladimir Putin, as soon as this summer. And I guess anything can happen. Normally, again, such a summit would perhaps require more planning, but as we saw with the North Korea thing, he could call it off and put it back on again. And I guess everybody expressed doubts that it could happen in the original time frame. Well, one, because a White House official was sent out to tell everybody, yeah, that can't happen. And I wonder now whether he was sent out to say it can't happen because they knew they had every intention of, well, one, not having a real summit, so it didn't require any planning or preparation. And two, it was always the plan to have it on schedule on June 12th, and he thought it would make it more dramatic if he hinted that it couldn't happen and even sent out a White House official to say it couldn't happen. And then magically Trump, by sheer force of will and personality, made it happen anyway. My God, he's a Superman, right? You know, and it kind of did work in a way. Negotiations with the Kremlin, to return to this storyline, have been underway for weeks. There's no stopping him, a senior administration official familiar with the internal deliberation said. He's going to do it. He wants to have a meeting with Putin, so he's going to have a meeting with Putin. And that's probably an authorized leak, too. First, It's made to make it sound like he's a bumbling idiot with a man crush on Putin, but underneath it all is the message that he wants it, so it's going to happen. And that's very Trump. Ever since Putin's re-election to another 6-year term, congratulations, by the way, in March, Trump has been pressing for a Putin summit, dismissing advisors' warnings about the political dangers of such a meeting. Yeah. Given the ongoing special counsel investigation into, you'll never believe it, it's about whether Trump and his campaign colluded with Russia as it interfered in the 2016 U.S. election on Trump's behalf. Thank you for finally explaining that. With the Russia allegations swirling, Trump never had the formal meeting he wanted with Putin last year, settling for just 2 brief encounters on the sidelines of international gatherings, but he has clearly never given up on his campaign vision of closer ties with the Russian strongman, whose autocratic rule he has often praised. The North Korea summit this week, which Trump jubilantly declared a historic encounter. Come on, New Yorker, you don't say an historic encounter? Please. You put an umlaut over the E in re-election. Is it an umlaut if it's over an E? I don't know. Maybe for some reason I thought that might have, whatever. Where were we with this? Yes, the historic encounter that will lead to the end, he says, of Pyongyang's nuclear program. Anyway, this has likely sealed the deal for an equally high-profile Putin meeting, and probably equally productive, I would guess. Now, Russia experts inside and outside the U.S. government are bracing themselves for a formal announcement to the summit, which is likely to happen as early as July, when Trump will be in Europe for the annual meeting of the NATO alliance that Putin considers his country's mortal enemy. So he's going to go to the NATO meeting and then have a useless, nonsensical, obsequious summit with Putin. Negotiations began in earnest, a senior administration official told me, after Trump disregarded his aides' do not congratulate warning. Oops, I didn't read that one. In his post-election phone call with Putin in March. During the conversation, Trump both congratulated the Russian leader on his election, which Western election observers said had failed to offer voters a real choice, and issued Putin an invitation to the White House. After the call, the Kremlin quickly released word of the invite and began publicly lobbying to pin down a date for a summit, but privately, the Russian president balked at the Oval Office as the meeting's venue. Putin doesn't want to come to Washington. Putin wants to meet in a third-party location. He knows summitry as well. The senior administration official told me, originally Trump didn't want to do that, but the Wall Street Journal reported last week that Putin asked Austria's new hard-right populist chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, to arrange the summit for Vienna, and the White House is considering the proposal. Very interesting. I'm surprised that Trump didn't remember that, truly memorable summitry happens in supposedly neutral third-party locations, Reykjavik, what have you. But he doesn't want a neutral one. He wants a pro-Trump one. But it's in another country, and that sort of looks like it might be neutral. So let's do it there. 2 former U.S. officials told me that they had also been briefed on Trump's orders to his staff to plan for the Putin summit soon. Soon, 2 weeks. One of them said it could even occur on the first leg of Trump's visit to Europe next month before Trump attends the annual NATO meeting. Oh, that's really visually. The optics of meeting with Putin first and then NATO. Getting together with Putin before the allies would be breaking every rule we've ever had, the former U.S. official said. A flagrant breach of protocol sure to upset Europeans, already jittery over Trump's criticism of the NATO alliance and his public embrace of Putin. Wow, so I guess he's really gunning for that one. He would love to upset them. A Russia summit would seem to be a perfect next act for a president who has embraced a personal diplomacy with American adversaries as the signature of his foreign policy. Trump's pursuit of a one-on-one with Putin mirrors his spur-of-the-moment decision to meet with the North Korean leader. A major policy move carried out in spite of his advisors, not because of them, and with little genuine support from either Republicans or Democrats. A Putin meeting, though, would be far more politically explosive than this week's Singapore summit, given the president's intensifying campaign to discredit or block the special counsel's investigation into whether his campaign colluded with Russia as the country worked to help elect him. But Trump, who has increasingly acted like a president unbound, seems undeterred by the troublesome politics that would make a Putin summit unimaginable at this point in any other presidency. Last Friday, in fact, Trump mounted his most explicitly pro-Putin foreign policy gambit yet, even as he assailed longtime allies for what he claimed were unfair trade practices. As he flew off to the annual G7 economic summit in Canada, Trump publicly demanded that Russia be readmitted to the group. The proposal for a reconstituted G8 had not been part of any serious discussion by Trump's foreign policy team, according to the senior official, but that didn't stop the president from making it. It was right out of the blue, the senior official told me. No one has ever said anything about that. Trump seemed unaware of, or at least undeterred by, the fact that it was the United States itself, with the strong support of both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, that championed the expulsion of Russia from the group in response to Russia's invasion and annexation of Crimea. Even after Trump's idea was quickly rebuffed by his increasingly angry G7 allies, the U.S. president has continued to push his Russia proposal. Indeed, it was still very much on his mind as he prepared to fly back from Singapore summit with Kim. Not with Kim, but the summit during which he met Kim. I've screwed that one up. Asked by Fox News' Bret Baier about his Russia plan, Trump said the G7 already spends much of its time on its troubled relationship with Putin, so the group should invite him back to the table. You know, we probably spend 25% of our time talking about Russia. And I said, wouldn't it be better if they were here? It would not, of course. They're talking about them. Sometimes you need to sort of treat them as adversaries, and you have sort of secret plans with your allies. What are we going to do about Russia? That's not an invitation to Russia to join the discussion. I'll tell you what you should do. Oh, no, you should not tell us this. Anyway, he went on to muse about how well he would get along with Putin if only they could meet, and this was interesting. Now, I think I would probably have a good relationship with him. He's told us a million times, I have a great relationship with him. I met him. I've talked to him. I talk to him regularly. It's interesting that it now is, I think I would probably have a good relationship with him. And I think that this is probably closer to the truth. I think he really doesn't have a relationship beyond, I got word that the Russians want this or that. And I don't know whether that even registers with him. I mean, he's a very dumb guy. And this may ultimately be the sort of defense he offers about collusion charges is, I don't care what people ask me for. I don't care about keeping people happy. That's not a thing I do. But keeping himself happy, and I think a successful handler would know the way to get him to do what you want is to make it look like it was his idea or that it's somehow strictly to his advantage. So now he says, I think I would probably have a pretty good relationship with him. Or I will be able to talk to him better than if you call somebody on the telephone to talk, Trump said. Sure, in-person meeting always, goes better than whatever, blah, blah, blah. Is there more here that we really needed to discover? This is it's a very interestingly written article. The New Yorker ones always look at a weird angle on things. I don't know. I suppose we should continue just to see what else we can glean from this. Trump's renewed public courting of Putin is not the only sign that the president feels increasingly emboldened, both on the world stage and at home. From free trade to the virtues of negotiating with dictators, Trump has made a series of dramatic moves in recent weeks that have alienated longtime allies and bucked decades-old core precepts of the Republican Party. That's true and interesting. And yet, Trump's political standing among members of his own party remains strong and is arguably growing, though we've had some pushback on that argument. The political costs of opposing him were on stark display in South Carolina, though this is what we disputed yesterday about Mark Sanford. And only a few hours after Trump had called for Sanford's ouster, again, this was a very weak claim that in the last 3 hours of polling you could have affected this thing. But also a tweet from Sanford's victorious opponent, Katie Arrington. We are the party of Donald J. Trump, she apparently crowed in her victory speech. Increasingly, few Republicans are willing to stand in Trump's way, even when the president's policies clash with their own deeply held views. Last week, the GOP blocked an attempt by moderates in the party to undo the president's announced steel and aluminum tariffs on allies. On North Korea, many skeptical Republicans held their fire about the summit's results or offered tepid concern about Trump's laudatory language towards one of the world's great human rights abusers. The public response from the GOP officials was a stark contrast to the expert commentary best summed up by The Economist cover line on Thursday, Kim Jong-un, W-O-N. Up on Capitol Hill, meanwhile, Republican leadership in the Senate this week was blocking an attempt to undo the president's announced steel and aluminum tariffs on allies. One of Trump's few remaining Republican critics, Senator Bob Corker, had been the lead sponsor of the measure, stopped by the leadership, and he lamented his party's failure to stand up for its previous bedrock principle of free trade. Yeah, all right, well, okay. I'm going to skip down a little bit further here. Russia may soon turn out to be yet another test. Washington's Russia hands are already bracing themselves for the possibility of a lavish, televised love fest between the president and Putin. And the real love fest will be available on videotape afterwards. The president appears to have no agenda for his desired summit beyond the wish that it take place, leading many experts to fear that the meeting could turn out to be little more than a bonding session with another brutal dictator. As Alexander Vershbow, former U.S. ambassador to Russia during George W. Bush's presidency, put it. Many Russia experts, and there are several, many Russia experts, however, worry that Putin is intent on securing major concessions from Trump. And that's a real possibility given what Trump himself had to say just the other day, such as relief from the tough economic sanctions that the U.S. and its allies have imposed on Russia since its 2014 Crimea invasion and 2016 U.S. election meddling. And Trump, they fear, might want to give it to him, though a veto-proof majority in Congress stood by those sanctions just last year. We'll see whether conditions have really changed since then, and whether he can convince people to back off once again. Danger. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio in our second hour of the last show of the week. We better move on, I think, but I am kind of enjoying the unique long-form insight here in the New Yorker on this stuff, bringing up some good discussion material. As I said, there was concern that Trump might make some serious concessions to the Russians at any such summit. And, given what happened in Singapore, I think it's pretty good odds. And if I'm right, I'm going to scroll down here. I think yesterday there was some discussion of, again, more stuff that Trump blurted out in interviews, and it may even have been with Bret Baier, and the same one quoted, I think, in this New Yorker piece, but they didn't grab precisely the same material. Let's see, somewhere in here there is that tweet, and I wished it was more, it was easier to find, but the deal was that Trump was musing aloud that, speaking with Putin face to face, that he would be able to get some sort of concessions out of Putin. Here we are on Russia's state television. They were airing they were airing footage of his interview on Air Force One, and I think that's the one with Bret Baier, during which he says that talking face-to-face would result probably in concessions. Of course, he's musing that he could get concessions out of Vladimir Putin. And the panel that's been assembled on Russian television here are shown side by side along with the video that they're viewing of Trump, and they're all either gasping or laughing aloud at the idea that Trump, A, would be able to get a concession out of Vladimir Putin, and B, that he could get it with the tactics as outlined. Because what he says to him is, he says, if I ask nicely, essentially, I think that I could maybe, if I just ask him, hey, just do me a favor. Why don't you get out of Crimea? Why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you do something about getting out of Syria? That he would respond positively to this. And I will say this, I don't doubt that there might be some thinking over on the Russian side that they might do well to preserve this, sycophantic relationship that they have with Trump, to grant him something that would look like a concession. What is it that we don't think is particularly important that we could give him, or lie about and say we were giving him and not do? That's also a possibility. That would, he would be able to take home and make himself look like he had accomplished something. But I don't think Syria or Crimea are likely to be among those things, unless for some reason they've decided we're done here. And I don't think that's happening in Crimea. They could walk away from Syria, I guess, but I don't think they might just have to go with the route of, yes, we're going to, and then he'll come back and say, see, I won, and then they just don't do it. But the panel laughing out loud is kind of funny at the idea that if I just ask nicely, maybe they'll do it. I should see. I'll see if I can grab somewhere the quote, but it's from the Bret Baier interview, and I gave you the gist of it. He really thinks that if I was sitting next to him at dinner and I asked nicely, could you do me a favor and get out of Crimea, that Putin would consider doing that. And well, it just seems a little silly. Anywho, let's see. We left off with the New Yorker, where the former ambassador during the W administration was equally appalled at the idea of a Russia summit really just being a bonding session between the two, another set of nuts, including Trump. Many Russia experts worry that Putin is intent on securing major concessions from Trump, and that the likely result would be, we'll stop doing military exercises in Western Europe as well in preparation for any Russian expansion into Europe. Okay, sure, we'll do that. And anything else? Sanctions, adoption, what do you want? Anyhow, inside the administration, Trump's ambassador to Moscow, the former Utah governor John Huntsman, was recently back in Washington to plan for the possible talks, and the senior administration told me that Huntsman, the National Security Advisor John Bolton, and the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have accepted the idea that Trump will insist upon a meeting. Those advisors are all well-known Russia skeptics, allegedly, who've spent years advocating for hawkish policies to counter threats from an increasingly aggressive Putin and will want to push Putin to cease hostilities in eastern Ukraine. But, as Trump showed with North Korea, that may matter little to the president. Consider the example of Bolton, who for years has ridiculed the idea that the North Koreans could be counted on to abide by any negotiated deal with the United States. A hawk who demeaned the Bush administration's negotiations with North Korea even while serving in it, Bolton once said that being called human scum by the North Koreans was, quote, the highest accolade I received during all my service in the Bush years. I'd love to accommodate you with more such high praise. Barely a month before his appointment as Trump's national security advisor, Bolton published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal headlined, "The Legal Case for Striking North Korea First." And yet, there he was in Singapore on Tuesday, shaking Kim Jong-un's hand and watching the President of the United States shower the dictator with praise. He's the National Security Advisor. Nicholas Eberstadt, a close observer of North Korea and a longtime colleague of Bolton's at the American Enterprise Institute, said he's not the national security decider. Okay, an interesting point. And we'll say marginally worth our time on that. There's plenty more to get to. Let's see. One lightning round entry, in case you thought today was going to pass without a new story about Scott Pruitt's rampant corruption. You are fooling yourself. Today, the New York Times running the headline for "Pruitt aids the boss's personal life was part of the job." And this would ordinarily be, no doubt, fascinating reading and a look inside the warped and incredibly corrupt mind of Scott Pruitt. And I'm sure that Eric Lipton, Steve Eder, Lisa Friedman, and Hiroko Tabuchi have done a fantastic job documenting that. I recommend it sight unseen for your weekend reading. The juiciest bits, though, that were shared. Pruitt, almost immediately upon taking office, presses his staff into personal service. And we've heard most of this, right? This is really brilliantly engineered. the release of this information in drips and drabs. He put EPA staffers to work seeking the purchase of used mattresses from the Trump Hotel. There was, can you get my wife a job at Chick-fil-A? No? Well, how about as a party planner for this particular nonprofit organization? No, not that either. All right. Well, how about, what was that? What did they finally land on? I don't know. He pressed somebody else for lobbying job or something. I can't even remember. I'm sure it's in the story. Who cares at this point? He was just having staffers shop around his wife or somebody give her a job for some reason. And apparently this was a sense of entitlement, as aides to Mr. Pruitt testified to who? I don't know. I can't remember. Who are they talking to here? In the review of possible ethics violations by Scott Pruitt. But they also apparently were put to work on, oh, yes, right. They had to find his favorite lotion from the Ritz-Carlton. And one thing I forgot to mention the other day, but I think I made brief mention of just yesterday, he also would send them around looking for his favorite Greek yogurt and granola bars because he's in such fine shape and whatnot. Finely tuned machine is Mr. Pruitt's body. The latest revelations then, to make a long story short, he was making his aides set up calls for him so that he could press various officials for favors for his daughter. He wanted her to have a Washington internship, I think a White House internship. Get me so-and-so on the phone. Hey, do you have room for my daughter? She wants to go to law school, and she decided she wants to go to UVA, a very fine law school, I am sure. So he had it set up. Get me, and I don't know how he decided on, the former Speaker of the House of Delegates in Virginia, Republican. Get me him, and I want to press for him to get my daughter into UVA law school. And I guess she actually is there. No comment from the school on whether that had any impact on her admission. But hey, Virginia, UVA, University of Virginia for Virginians, I say. She should have gone to the University of Oklahoma. When he goes back and runs for governor there, it's not going to look that good that he put his daughter in UVA instead of University of Oklahoma, but people won't care. Anyway, so yeah, there. Somebody else can complain that they lost their spot at UVA Law School to Scott Pruitt's genius daughter, who was getting freebie internships and housing, by the way, while she was there in Washington. Okay, interesting. Just so you know, I'm sure there's some more stuff, and of course more will drop shortly, but that's the topic of the day for Scott Pruitt. Let's see. Lots of great reaction out there. I probably don't need to inform you of what happened yesterday with, let's see, the Inspector General's report released by the Department of Justice, an enormous report apparently. I'm sure many of you have made your way at least partially through it. The New York Times summed it up very nicely, I think, in this opinion piece by David Leonhardt. The report's message, Trump is lying. And we'll just give you the lead on that so that you get the idea of where this is coming from. The new report from the Justice Department's watchdog covers a lot of ground, and it was in turn covered very poorly. Many of you think, I am sure, and I would agree with you. It runs more than 500 pages and evaluates investigations that touch both President Trump and Hillary Clinton. As a result, some of the initial news coverage, which has to cram all of the big findings into a few paragraphs, can be a little difficult to follow. If you're trying to do so, I recommend keeping your focus on the big picture. So what is his view of the big picture? The report addresses one question that's more important than any other. Did the Justice Department and the FBI use their power, as Trump has repeatedly claimed, to help Clinton's campaign and hurt his? In the lead up to the report, Trump's allies agreed that this was paramount. The central question, in my opinion, David Bossie, Trump's former deputy campaign manager, wrote this week on the Fox News website is, did Hillary Clinton and her cronies get preferential treatment in her email server investigation for political reasons? And the report's answer is clear, no. Federal investigators and prosecutors did not give preferential treatment to Clinton. They pursued the case on its merits. They were guided by, as the Inspector General's report puts it, the prosecutor's assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practice. The most significant mistake in the investigation didn't help Clinton. It hurt her badly. James Comey's, of course. Now that the report has been released, Trump and his allies are trying to confuse people about what it actually said. Naturally. Why not? Gaslight. The White House and loyal media organizations like Fox News are mixing the report's subjects to make it sound much better for Trump than it really is, and more serious news coverage often struggles to find clear enough language to explain the bait and switch without seeming to lose its objectivity, and you can't have that. Basic bottom line here, though, Trump and his allies have been saying forever that the obvious conclusion was that the FBI and the Department of Justice were in cahoots to help Clinton, not hurt her. The facts say the opposite. And in fact, we know plenty about the leakiness, and that's covered in a report of the New York field office, and they were actively working pro-Trump. But the only thing that a reasonable person can draw from as a conclusion from this report is all of the allegations that Trump has been making to the contrary are false and disproved by this report once and for all. But who cares, because the right wing is using the report to actually, believe it or not, among other things, insisting that it demonstrates that Pizzagate was real. So there's really no dealing with these guys. It's absolutely true, and I think we read a piece the other day that said as much, and Greg might have brought it to our attention. It was a nice tweet storm about it, and I forget exactly who it was. But yeah, forget about it. You're never going to be able to reach these guys. And more of them are more deplorable than we originally thought, I think, except for those of us who thought they were all deplorable from the beginning, and there wasn't even a matter of 50% of them belonging in that basket. It was every single one. All right, the other big story of the day, and I could easily have done the entire show on this one, except that I feel like I've already done entire shows on it. The big news there, the Washington Post, will turn to David Farenthold to cover it, because really, honestly, who else could possibly do it justice? New York files civil suit, and remember that, it's a civil suit, against President Trump, alleging his charity engaged in illegal conduct. And of course it did. We're talking about the Donald J. Trump Foundation, and we documented, along with David Farenthold, very thoroughly all the violations. I mean, it was Farenthold documenting most of the violations. We did a little bit of independent, or I shouldn't say independent research. We read other sources who went into depth on other aspects of the problems that his use of the Trump Foundation was creating. And I think we did a pretty credible job in explaining in particular what was self-dealing, why is it bad, and in what ways was he doing it. There's new stuff, though, in the New York suit, and let's turn to Farenthold's reporting on it and see if we can't use that as a guide to get through this. New York's Attorney General filed suit against President Trump and his three eldest children on Thursday. Tiffany escapes, and so does Barron in this one, which, is to be expected, I guess. But this is important that it includes Eric, Don Jr., and Ivanka in this, alleging persistently illegal conduct, and that's not good, at the president's personal charity, and saying that Trump had repeatedly misused the nonprofit organization to pay off his business's creditors, to decorate one of his golf clubs, and to stage a multi-million-dollar giveaway at 2016 campaign events. And that last bit is where things really get particularly juicy for us. We've covered most of the other two angles on this. In the suit, Attorney General Barbara Underwood asked a state judge to dissolve the Donald J. Trump Foundation. That's been in the offing for some time. She asked that its remaining $1 million in assets be distributed to other charities, or really, I would say, to any charity at all, because it's not in the hands of a charity now, and that Trump be forced to pay at least $2.8 million in restitution and penalties. And by the way, I still argue he owes $1 million to Palm Beach in a related story. But we'll see if we get to that one. Underwood also asked that Trump be banned from leading any other New York nonprofit organization for 10 years. And I hope that applies to all of the Trump kids as well. Seeking to apply a penalty usually reserved for the operators, funny enough, of small-time charity frauds to the President of the United States. Of course, minus his so-called election, he really was just a small-time charity fraud. The allegations of sweeping misuse by Trump of his personal foundation came the same day that he faced another legal setback with the rejection by an appeals court in New York of his request to halt a defamation lawsuit by a former Apprentice contestant. That decision leaves open the possibility that Trump could be deposed in the case. And that's actually big news, but it didn't make big news because there's too much else going on. Meanwhile, Underwood sent letters to the IRS and the FEC in which she identified what she called possible violations of tax law and federal campaign law by Trump's foundation. This is the juicy stuff I was talking about. The claims in the New York Attorney General's suit could trigger tax penalties by the IRS, according to tax law experts, who noted that the Justice Department can also bring criminal charges when prosecutors believe tax law violations are willful. Do we get into the nitty-gritty of what it was? Right now, it's still just more reporting about the charge or the filing of the suit itself. Mark S. Owens, former head of the IRS's nonprofit division, called the suit an extraordinary catalog of how not to run a private foundation. There's little else Trump could have done that would have made it worse. In other words, he ran the thing with such carelessness, and perhaps intentionally so, that almost everything they did will turn out to be illegal. And meanwhile, he's bragging that, well, we were able to give away all this money because we have no overhead and we didn't pay anybody any salaries and we didn't have any legal team. And I know, well, a legal team would have told you all this stuff you're doing is illegal. So they fired that team. And, really the fact that the things that they're pointing to about having no overhead really end up being, evidence for the prosecution in all this. But of course, it's not a prosecution. It's a civil suit. But anyway. Let's see. Naturally, Trump's tried to discredit the suit by saying it was originated by Eric Schneiderman, and it was. But he's gone, and guess what? Somebody without his baggage can press the same case because the stuff in it is true. Anyway, I'm looking for let's see. I guess we'll get to the details of things here. As our investigation reveals, the Trump Foundation was little more than a checkbook for payments from Mr. Trump or his business to nonprofits, regardless of their purpose or legality. In the suit, Underwood noted that Trump paid more than $330,000 in reimbursements and penalty taxes since 2016, but she asked the judge to require Trump to pay millions more. She said a 20-month state investigation found that Trump had repeatedly violated laws that set the ground rules for tax-exempt foundations. Most important, that their money is meant to serve the public good, not to provide private benefits to their founders. Underwood said that oversight of spending at Trump's foundation was so loose that its board of directors hadn't met since 1999, and its official treasurer wasn't even aware that he was on the board. Without any outside supervision, the foundation came to serve the spending needs of Trump. Wow, who could believe it? And then, in 2016, the needs of his presidential campaign. Here's where it gets really, that much worse. She cited emails from Trump campaign staff members, including then campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, directing which charities should receive gifts from the Trump Foundation and in what amounts in the lead up to the crucial Iowa caucuses. In other words, what they were doing was, in the handwritten notes and emails detail this, we're going to Iowa, going to the Iowa caucuses. We're heading to New Hampshire after that for the primaries. They were arranging the award to the favorite charities of key figures in Republican politics in Iowa, and I'm sure elsewhere, of gigantic chunks of money, or what looked to them like gigantic chunks of money from the Trump Foundation. In other words, money that was supposed to be for charitable purposes, but never was being spent. And I'm sure they thought this was fine. It said, look, what's wrong with it? It's a charity and I'm giving money to other charities. Well, yeah, but you can't do that and then call and say, hint, hint, Trump's charity just gave your quote unquote favorite charity $100,000. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but the Iowa caucuses are coming. That's not permissible. You can't use a charitable foundation for that sort of transfer. And everybody knows it. But I don't know. They may genuinely not have known it because they made no effort to conceal it. But who cares? It doesn't really matter whether you know it or not. It's still illegal. Let's see. What else have we got here? There's also, I saw being circulated a handwritten note of some kind from Trump, and very obviously in his own handwriting, directing the use of foundation money, this we discussed during the campaign, to pay off the fine from Palm Beach for the oversized, gigantic, as they say, car dealership-sized flagpole and American flag at Mar-a-Lago, which violates their very prissy, stupid, admittedly stupid codes down there. And he worked out a settlement with Palm Beach to pay $100,000 to somebody's favorite charity, which was a veterans organization, which Trump was very happy about because it made him look super patriotic, etc. So let's go ahead and do it. But then the bum wouldn't even pay the $100,000 out of his own pocket or Mar-a-Lago's coffers, which is what was supposed to happen from Palm Beach's viewpoint. They were fining him and Mar-a-Lago, not the foundation. But Trump figured $100,000 is $100,000. What are they going to be upset about? Of course, by the way, the fines, repeating fines, he was fined for every day he kept the stupid flag in place. And he had accrued about $120,000 worth of fines, and the settlement was for a $100,000 donation. So he already gypped them on that. Then he didn't even pay it out of the coffers of the entity with which they had a dispute. So, to me, that fine is unpaid, and he should have been accruing $250 a day since October of 2006, since it's still unpaid. The Palm Beach could have him, I say, on the hook for $1 million. Why take $100,000 when you could hit him for $1 million? Anyway, moving on with this, 3 of Trump's adult children, you know which ones, were named in the lawsuit because they have been official board members of the foundation for years. Under the law, board members are supposed to scrutinize a charity's spending for signs that its leader, in this case, Dad, was misusing money, but they didn't. The 3 siblings abdicated all responsibility for ensuring that the foundation's assets were used in compliance with the law. And in fact, we learned, of course, in many cases, they were used for the benefit of the kids as well. Eric Trump and his foundation, which actually was running as a charity should until Dad and Michael Cohen forced him to corrupt it. He should be furious with them. Anyway, we also know from Farenthold's own reporting, and this gets mentioned here, that most of the money in the foundation didn't come from Donald Trump anyway. And then finally, behind the scenes, the foundation was essentially one of Trump's personal piggy banks, a pool of money that his accounting clerks knew to use whenever Trump wanted to pay a nonprofit organization. By law, Trump wasn't allowed to buy things for himself using the charity's money, even if he was buying them from nonprofit groups. At one point during a deposition, a New York State investigator asked Alan Weisselberg, a Trump Organization employee who was listed as treasurer of the Trump Foundation, whether the foundation had a policy for determining which specific payments it was allowed to make. There's no policy, just so you understand, Weisselberg said. The interviewer asked whether Weisselberg had understood that he was actually on the board of the Trump Foundation and had been for more than a decade. I did not, he replied. Guess what, Alan? Trump just sunk you. He threw you under the bus. You're on the hook for this whole thing, and you didn't even know it, and he didn't even tell you, because if he told you, you probably, maybe, would have thought, perhaps I should be doing my job here. Alan Weisselberg, therefore, by the way, is the Alan W. addressed in the handwritten note I mentioned earlier, which directed someone, Alan W., to move $100,000 from the foundation to this veterans charity. And it specifically says in the handwritten note, in satisfaction, allegedly, of the settlement agreement with Palm Beach over that flag. Oh, well, looks like you're in trouble now. Twice, Underwood said, Trump used the charity's money to settle legal disputes that involved his for-profit businesses. That's a huge problem. That's what I'm talking about. Both of these payments were first reported by the Post. In March, after the Attorney General's investigation was underway, Trump repaid his foundation the $258,000 it had spent in those cases, plus more than $12,000 in interest. Underwood also listed several smaller instances of what she called self-dealing, meaning Trump using the foundation and its money to help his businesses. According to Underwood, the charity paid $5,000 to place an ad for Trump hotels in the program for a charity gala. paid $32,000 to satisfy an obligation of a Trump company that manages a New York estate, and paid $10,000 to buy a portrait of Trump, which was later found hanging in a sports bar at Trump's Doral Golf Resort. Underwood said Trump already repaid the amounts spent by the foundation plus penalty taxes, totaling more than $4,000. IRS rules also prohibit tax-exempt foundations from aiding political campaigns, but Underwood listed 2 instances in which Trump's foundation also seemed to do so. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. All right, well, how about that? I think I may have just simply talked straight through the intro to my break, and I was facing the other direction, and therefore not seeing my alarm go off and tell me that we were in our hard break. And I'll bet that those of you listening live were like, hey, what the hell happened here? Well, I thought maybe I would add some music and come back. I don't know how I'm going to engineer this for the podcast. We'll just have to talk straight past it. Where did I leave off, those of you who happen to be listening live? I was probably explaining to you that there were 2 instances that Underwood's suit alleges in which Donald Trump used the foundation to make political donations. And surprisingly enough, here, even in Farenthold's fantastic reporting, he makes mention of an August 2013 donation to Florida State Attorney General Pam Bondi, and makes mention of the fact that it was an illegal donation, that he repaid that $25,000 to the foundation and a penalty tax of 10% on that, but makes no mention of the fact that he was donating to Pam Bondi as she was contemplating filing suit against Trump University as a fraud. And guess what? Upon the receipt of $25,000 illegally from his foundation to her campaign, she made the very sound legal decision not to pursue a case against Trump University, a case which was eventually satisfactorily concluded by the states that did bring suit against him, because, of course, Trump University was a huge fraud. Pam Bondi didn't think so on the moment she got $25,000 illegal dollars from Donald Trump. The fact that that is not mentioned here is a major oversight. Anyway, I think probably at this point we will wrap up the Farenthold coverage of yesterday's lawsuit. It's very exciting, and I think it's going to be very revealing, and it makes for a good avenue to what shall we say, to crack open the case further and to keep Trump's misdeeds in the headlines. But I'm not sure whether it lasts more than a couple of days. And we're heading into the weekend, and I'm sure there'll be some fresh outrage over the weekend that will distract from this. But I hope not. I hope it's something that they can go back to. And the fact that it's a legal proceeding means we'll at least get a couple of more hits in the days to come as things progress. I guess whoever orchestrated the pacing of the stories dropping against Scott Pruitt should be identified and brought to work on, I would say, on probably both the DOJ Inspector General's report and this civil suit. But I like the fact that it draws in the rest of the family. And this is the first of the actions against Trump that specify that the rest of the family acted illegally as well. All right. Let's see. There's definitely a couple more things that we ought to get to, and about a week's worth of stuff that we won't get to. But let us also make mention of this incident, I guess. I'm happy to hear about this one. You'll recall that the other day we shared both the, there's probably some auto-playing video in this that I might have to trap. But, we shared the story in Maclean's from, was it Scott? Now I can't even remember, the name of our author in this one. And I want to say Scott McGinnis, but I'm thinking that, that might actually be someone else. And I'll scroll down here and see if we can't find it. But you remember the discussion in Maclean's magazine where I think this originated of, using, of levying personal sanctions. Here we are. Scott Gilmore. That's our name. Who's Scott McGinnis? I have to look that up. And who am I getting confusing him with? But he was the one that I saw first proposing. Scott Gilmore was, sanctions against Trump, almost as though he were an American version of Russian oligarchs, whom we sanction personally here in the United States for their illegal activities, and proposing that this was perhaps the only way to really get Trump's attention and interest in this whole thing and really make him feel the pain of any retaliatory measures that Canada in particular and perhaps other allies might want to take with respect to the trade sanctions that he's imposing on them. And I thought that made terrific sense. And apparently so did Matt Iglesias, who picked up on the same argument. And I tweeted a great deal about it. And we had found some resonance in it. And I thought it was a smart idea to, to tag Justin Trudeau in these things on Twitter. Who knows who's reading his Twitter feed for him, and would they pick up on this? And, the fact that it was being argued, of course, in a Canadian outlet made it possible that they might say, so long as we didn't, screw it up for them in some way. We point out, look, this idea came from a Canadian outlet. It's a smart idea. You should be thinking about this. And that should make a very easy transition to the, higher levels of power in Canada, provided, we find an entree. It wasn't going to happen from my Twitter feed, but you know how Twitter works. Somebody else sees it, somebody else sees it, somebody else sees it. And then the right people have finally seen it. And then we were all fascinated to see the Houston Chronicle picking up on the same idea. And, they don't have to cite it to me. Even if they happen to see it somehow from me, they can point instead to, Maclean's, and that's fairly legitimate, and move on from there. So apparently it's made its way into the Canadian government after all. And here, let's see, can I play this? Will this come out as audio or maybe what I should do is open it up on this computer, and then we would be able to play the audio directly in if this works. But it is a Canadian MP, Member of Parliament, for those of us who pretend we don't know anything about Canada or any foreign country whatsoever. Aaron Weir is the name of this gentleman who, I'm not so sure we even want to get involved with him or even bother calling him a gentleman. I don't know anything about the guy, but, in the most brief review, because I said, all right, well, this is nice that he did this thing. Should we mention it? He's got issues of his own, and they include, charges of sexual harassment, naturally, because he's a dude and a politician, and that sometimes happens. So no personal endorsement that we can feel safe making at this juncture of Aaron Weir. However, I am glad to see that this question was asked. And here's what happened. The report is, where'd this one go? Is this, this is also in Maclean's, covering the coverage of their own coverage, I guess, basically. Could Ottawa slap the Trump organization with trade sanctions? Kyle Edwards writing this. And we have done no background investigation into either Scott Gilmore or Kyle Edwards. Maybe they're all guilty of sexual harassment. Who knows? I'm not saying they are, but apparently everyone in the world is. And so you might as well just go ahead with that assumption. I'm sure no one would object to that. Okay. Everyone would object to that? Fine. I have no reason to believe it. Look, the one about Aaron Weir just jumped out at me. It's not my fault. Foreign Minister, what is her first name here? Chrystia? Chrystia. Chrystia Freeland. I'm sorry. You're the Foreign Minister of Canada. Like if there's a minister that we should know beyond the prime minister, the foreign minister would probably be it. I'm no good for this. Anyway, the Canadian foreign minister has left the option wide open. We welcome ideas from all Canadians on what should and should not be on our retaliation list. And what a list to have, by the way. Luckily, Maclean's is a Canadian outlet. I assume Gilmore may or may not be a Canadian citizen, but you can at least point to a Canadian magazine for the idea. Here's what Aaron Weir does with his question time for the Prime Minister, although it's answered in this case by the Foreign Minister. It's pretty short. Let's play the video and see if this works. I've pressed play, so far no is the answer. Here we are.
Mr. Speaker, everyone in this House supports the Prime Minister standing up to President Trump.
I'll pause it here just to say, love the accent. Everyone in this House. It's fantastic. I enjoy the Canadian accent. And there are two different ones on display here as well. So let's start over here.
The government has announced retaliatory tariffs targeting selective American electoral districts. Unlike previous American presidents, Trump has made himself vulnerable by not divesting his personal business interests.
And again, I pause it here. Not only, again, fantastic accent. But yeah, here making a great point that I'm not certain was outlined in Gilmore's article or not. And I can't remember whether we read all the way through it. But a point that I actually was making in my tweeting about this is that he has left himself vulnerable to sanctions by not divesting. And it's something that we didn't really give a great deal of thought or discussion to until this idea came up. We always discussed the fact that he hadn't divested from his own businesses as a vehicle for emoluments, benefits flowing to him. But one of the reasons that it's prohibited is we don't want other countries to be able to have that kind of leverage over presidents and their personal interests. You should be divesting yourself from your personal interests so that other countries can't force you to do something on behalf of the country when you're in fact acting on behalf of your own financial interests. A great point, but one I didn't see made elsewhere except in my own tweets about it, and it worries me a great deal that Canadians may be secretly reading my tweets and using them to run their government. But he's just making a suggestion at this point.
To apply further pressure, has the government considered retaliatory sanctions targeting the Trump Organization rather than the American people?
Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, the tariffs imposed by the United States on steel and aluminum are illegal and unjustified, and the national security pretext is absurd and frankly insulting to Canadians. In putting together our retaliation list, we have been measured and we have created a perfectly reciprocal list. We are now in a consultation period, and we welcome ideas from all Canadians on what should and what should not be in our retaliation list.
Well, all right. Very interesting. And a lot of nods of agreement, by the way, going on in the background, alongside the foreign minister on that. I guess anybody who's sitting alongside the foreign minister is likely to be in agreement, but, well done, well suggested. I'm glad the question was asked. I don't know if I can help you with, whether or not Aaron Weir is a worthy party or not, but it was a damn good question. I'll read you from Kyle Edwards' write-up of it just so you can, figure out, I didn't do any specific research on Aaron Weir. It occurred to me at the moment to do it, but I didn't need to because thankfully it was done for us by the author here. Amid an escalating trade war between the U.S. and Canada, this after Donald Trump imposed tariffs on imports of aluminum and steel, and Canadian officials quickly threatened retaliation with their own set of trade restrictions, politicians of all stripes, I guess, north of the border are having their say on what Ottawa's, or however you would say that, next bold move should be. This time it was, let me see if we can get that. This is we learned this from Brian, the riding that he represents. Regina Leuven, Lewvan. I hope I got something close on that one. This time it was Regina Leuven MP Aaron Weir, former NDPer, who identifies as a member of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, his party's, NDP, I guess, his old party's precursor, and one that we're resurrected earlier this year after being expelled from the NDP caucus over sexual harassment allegations. So, yeah, that wasn't really exactly what you wanted to hear afterwards, and now you're forced to use the stupid trombone sound effect. But look, the point was a solid one regardless, and people were nodding in agreement. And I don't know what the allegations were and how solid they were, and maybe they were perfectly 100% on the nose. And unfortunate, but a sideshow. Anyway, during Tuesday's question period, the write-up continues, Weir took the floor, and I hope I'm saying his name right, saying everyone in the House supports the Prime Minister, you heard it, standing up to President Trump, and in his fantastic accent, pointing out that Trump has made himself vulnerable by not divesting his personal business interests. There ought to be an equal and opposite reaction to his not divesting, and this was anticipated. We were able to anticipate it theoretically. It was like particle physics or astrophysics. So we know that there has to be one out there. We conceive of it theoretically. We've just never been able to prove that it exists until now. So, okay, a very interesting exchange, and I'm gratified that they're taking note of it. And, once again, I guess I'll spend part of the weekend sorting through Scott Gilmore's column and maybe a few of the others as well to see whether they take note of the fact that, yes, there is a reciprocal vulnerability here. And, the undiscussed reason so far, anyway, undiscussed reason for the emoluments clause inclusion in the Constitution in the first place. All right. What else have we got? A few other things that we should note before cutting out of here for the weekend. One, let's go over here to Think Progress and take note of this development. Joshua Eaton has written up for them. Gun makers have the successor to the bump stock lined up. And I guess we should have anticipated this as well. And a moment's thought really would lead you to this conclusion. Subheader here, as gun companies continue to innovate, gun control advocates fear an end run around long-standing regulations. Trump, of course, never followed through on his televised promise to ban bump stocks nationally, and to hell with the NRA, because, of course, no, not to hell with the NRA. Let's do instead exactly what the NRA wants and forget that I said this other thing about banning bump stocks. Though it should be mentioned, and that's the purpose of my bookmarking this story here, good reminder, we explained to you at great length here on the show, bump stocks aren't necessary in order to make any semi-automatic weapon fire like a machine gun. You can do it with your bare hands. We've explained it extensively. I don't want to give any more, tutoring on the subject. But essentially, if you're worried about guns that can fire like machine guns being in civilian hands, the problem, believe it or not, and this is somewhat, this is probably actually mind-blowing to some people who haven't heard this before, it's too late. Every semi-automatic weapon on the market, anything, Glock pistols, the basic handguns that millions upon millions of Americans have, and that's the scope of the problem here, can all do this with no modification. Ultimately, the problem is we've been sold a bill of goods. The NRA and other lobbyists for the gun interests just told us that these things are like normal, everyday usage things, and they're not designed to fire like machine guns, and they can't, and that's the difference between them and machine guns, except it's really not there. The difference is, just as they keep saying, well, it doesn't matter what you ban because, you people who hate guns, you don't understand, that these can just basically be designed around. And it's never fully explained that the reason that they can be designed around is that the basic, vehicle that we're talking about here of delivering the munitions, a semi-automatic weapon is always going to be this close to being a machine gun. All you have to do is change the engineering just slightly and you're going to have one. And the fact that I don't really know. I'm not certain of the history of this, the pitching and sales of semi-automatic weapons. They're pretty old. So, I mean, I think it just happened in the pre-regulatory era. And then so many millions of them were sold and so many millions of people came to believe that they were something different because in the ordinary course of use, they didn't fire like machine guns. And so therefore, so many of them were sold and without particular regulation. And only now do we realize, oh, these really are basically, items that weapons that can be used as machine guns. But maybe the knowledge of that isn't widespread. And so, we're still not in position to really make policy based on that. But I think we do ourselves a favor in saying, all right, well, let's be honest about these things. All of these things can be used just like machine guns with small, not even modifications, just modifications to the way they are fired, not mechanically, but the way you hold it in your hands. And that was my big problem, the big problem underlying the bump stock ban issue. And I'd like to see it done because honestly, bump stocks make it a lot easier, one, to do the bump firing that makes a semi-automatic fire like a machine gun. And two, it makes it far easier to aim while you're doing it. So you make the gun more deadly and more accurate at the same time. And although it's possible to bump fire a semi-automatic pistol with your bare hands, it's a little awkward. That's the only thing separating them from machine guns, really. You're still going to sound crazy saying that at this point because people just don't think of semi-automatic pistols in the same way. But a fact is a fact, and you can find YouTube is full of videos of people firing their everyday semi-automatic pistols as machine guns with their bare hands. And I'm not kidding. It's just, the rest of America hasn't caught up on this. Anyway, Think Progress is reporting something slightly different, which is that if you ban bump stocks, they're going to come up with some other product that may or may not actually be physically different in any way from bump stocks, but do the same thing. And we're just going to be chasing our tails for a while. But you know what? Chase your tails. It's okay. I'm cool with that. Ban this thing next. It will take some time. But if we're on the ball, we can ban it within a year or so. That's how much time it would take, bureaucratically speaking. And then, in that time, there just aren't going to be that many people who get a hold of these things. There'll be enough that it's a problem. But here's the thing. Now, here's what they're selling. They are stabilizing braces that essentially turn AR-15 type weapons into pistols with, mechanisms that mimic the work of bump stocks. I'll let Joshua Eaton's write-up try and make sense of things. Before Stephen Paddock, we shouldn't even name him, the Las Vegas shooter, opened fire at a country music festival on the Las Vegas Strip last October, killing 58, remember this? And wounding hundreds, remember? 600 people shot. Most Americans probably hadn't heard of bump fire stocks, add-ons that let a semi-automatic rifle fire as quickly as a machine gun. Until that mass shooting, they were a novelty known only among firing range enthusiasts and cool gun YouTube. Within months of Las Vegas, lawmakers produced bipartisan legislation to outlaw the devices, and the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives now, or ATF, announced plans to ban them through regulation. But gun control advocates warn bump stocks are just one part of a much bigger problem. A flood of new technologies is pushing the envelope on what a civilian can legally own, skirting laws that have kept the most dangerous weapons off the street for decades. Like bump stocks, these other technologies are primarily found on gun ranges and YouTube videos. They're designed to skirt existing gun laws and to deliver the same deadly effect as a banned weapon, but with a technical change that makes them legal to own, carry, and sell. What the industry is doing is it's sitting down and it's saying, we're going to devise any possible way to work around this legally. Chipman, now a senior policy advisor to the advocacy group Giffords Law Center, told Think Progress. I think I missed the introduction of Chipman, but you get the idea. And so what you have is devices that are legal. They are lawful, but they are awful. That's a sort of clever turn of phrase. The National Rifle Association and the National Shooting Sports Foundation The gun industry's largest trade groups did not return requests for comment for this story. But look, weapons like machine guns, silencers, and short-barreled rifles and shotguns are regulated under the National Firearms Act of 1934 and subsequent amendments. And of course, as you know, big push on to remove silencers from that regulation. To own one of these weapons, a civilian has to go through a lengthy approval process and pay a special tax. The job of deciding whether a gun falls under NFA's restriction falls to ATF. Gun manufacturers have used the law's technicalities to create guns that are just as powerful and deadly as restricted weapons, but without the added tax and strict regulations. Take the Saint by Springfield Armory. It is an AR-15 with a 30-round magazine and a 7.5-inch barrel. Now that's shorter than the legal rifle length under federal law, but instead of a shoulder stock, the Saint has a stabilizing brace or a forearm brace, a device designed to attach to a shooter's forearm for one-handed firing rather than resting against their shoulder. And you should see the thing. There's a picture in the Think Progress piece. And basically it is what you think. It's a brace coming off the back that looks like a minimalist rifle stock that you would normally put against your shoulder to fire, but it only reaches about halfway down the forearm and ends in a Velcro strap that goes around the forearm. You strap it on like a prosthetic device and brace it against your forearm instead of your shoulder. That makes it possible to fire one-handed. Okay? So by the ATF's definition, the Saint is therefore a pistol and not a rifle because it isn't meant to be fired from the shoulder. So anyone who can pass a federal background check can buy one online for a rather steep price, $989. But people are into it. They might go and get it. And there you go. That's the sort of thing that normally gun enthusiasts are saying. You people don't understand anything. We can make the minor technical changes. You can't even define what a rifle is anymore. We can just redesign it, and so it looks like a pistol. And so therefore you can't decide can't define what assault weapons are or whatever. All right. You'll catch us out for a couple of months, but we'll catch up to you. Don't worry about it. We'll just keep making you pay more in design fees than you can afford. The company touts how small and lightweight the gun is on its website, which advertises the weapon for QCB, or Close Quarters Combat, which really shouldn't that be CQB? I don't know why maybe it's just a typo here. Anyway, this pistol delivers the punch of a rifle caliber in small, fast-handling frame. How exciting. So now you can put two of them on and conduct a school shooting. And I imagine someone will do that shortly. Those are the same qualities that gun control advocates say make these kinds of weapons as deadly as the short-barreled rifle, which is highly regulated. Short-barreled rifles are less accurate than ones with longer barrels, and they fire at lower velocity because of their barrel length, and that is helpful. They've long been used by police SWAT teams and in military settings where weight and maneuverability are more important than accuracy. And I think that would make a good weapon for SWAT teams responding to shootings rather than AR-15s. Inside of a building or inside of a vehicle, it's more maneuverable with a short barrel. Mark Jones, another former ATF special agent who's now a gun control advocate, told Think Progress, it's easier to retain if you're doing some sort of police clearing operation. You're not going to telegraph yourself going around a wall. Like bump stocks, stabilizing braces were originally designed for people with physical disabilities. Did you know that? ATF approved the devices, but in a January 2015 open letter, the agency strongly implied that firing a pistol fitted with a stabilizing brace from the shoulder would convert it into a short-barreled rifle, which requires a special tax and registration. Isn't that interesting? Don't strap it to your arm, but hold it in close to your shoulder, and now it's a restricted machine gun, and you have to pay a special tax. Move it out and strap it to your arm and hold it out away from your body, and it's not subject to that. That is kind of crazy, but that's where we are. So that's it. I mean, really, there's a nice video here on how wonderful the stabilizing brace is for use by gun enthusiasts and or police. But, I'll leave that to you to view on your own time. We are out of time here for the moment. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I don't think that's going to break wide necessarily over the weekend, but it's the kind of thing that, we could fit in and remind you that once again, I mean, ultimately, we all have to kind of work together on finding messaging for this. But ultimately, we've been fooled for 100+ years, unfortunately, and there's no undoing it now. Every semi-automatic weapon there is can be bump-fired. Pistols, you don't need a special $989 Sig Sauer. You don't need an arm brace. You don't need anything. There's also plenty of video out there if you don't want to do it in the awkward fashion with your fingers, bump-fire your pistol. You can build something out of wood in your own wood shop that does the same thing. And why is it that it's so easy to modify all these things that can be done either with your bare hands or even with something you could build yourself out of wood? The answer is all semi-automatic weapons can do this. Anyone who has a semi-automatic weapon potentially has a machine gun. All they need is the will to fire it that way. And as we know, that can crop up at any time, anywhere, with basically no warning, and so I think we ought to be aware of this. I don't know that we're going to be able to legislate our way out of it, but we might as well be able to point it out to people when it comes up. All right, more after this about what's coming up next.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
With David Waldman.
Well, among all the many things that I missed today in my fervor to get to many stories was the request by Armando to talk about the IG report. That'll still be around, of course, on Monday if you're interested in doing it then. And for now, you need to stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. What have we possibly missed? There's always hundreds of stories, and he's got them.